Hey travelers, Mag here, and today we are starting off 3 days worth of adventuring here in Sydney, Australia. I'm hosting an event and one other geocacher is showing up, thank you for that by the way. And from here we are looking forward to quite the adventure. I'll be breaking this day down into 2 parts. For the first part, we're starting off here at Hyde Park, the oldest park in Australia. From here we're going to walk down to Central Station before swinging back around to the north to go to the Sydney Opera House. By then, I'll be ready for a break for lunch and we'll move on to our next video. I'm looking forward to showing you what this part of Sydney has in store, and I can't wait to see it for myself as well. So let's get out there together. Come on, let's go.
Hyde Park is a 40-acre park located in the central business district along the eastern edge of the Sydney city centre. It is a fairly rectangular design running from north to south, bordered on the west by Elizabeth Street, on the east by College Street, on the north by both St. James Road and Prince Albert, and on the south by Liverpool Street. Its area was first reserved for use by Governor Phillip in 1792, which is what makes it the oldest public park anywhere in Australia. Its history, though, can be traced even further back than the European settlement in 1788. Prior to that, the land had been used by the local Aboriginal people who hunted ducks in the swampy marshes. It was also used for an important Aboriginal contest of strength, which is thought to have taken place near the south end of the park, although the exact location is unknown. The development of this park has been a slow and steady process over the centuries. The first real development began in 1810, when it transitioned from a place for gathering firewood and grazing animals into a horse racing course. It remained relatively barren, without any grass or trees, until 1854, when the Hyde Park Improvement Committee took charge of the grounds. They formalized walking paths, began plantings, and installing civic monuments. The first monument was installed in 1857, an obelisk facing Bathurst Street, which also served as a vent for the underground sewer. Now it is filled with monuments from end to end and more than 580 trees.
For me, the only real downside of hosting an event this morning was that it would require me to stay in place for the event time, which is an hour. And if you know me, I don't like to stop moving. When I'm out geocaching, I am go, go, go all the time. I've been moving quite a bit this morning though, so I'm not gonna lie, sitting here at the fountain, just enjoying the breeze and cool water coming off for a little bit, I can live with it. The real trick here, of course, is that I'm looking to get a busy day today, which means 6 different icon types. I looked at the map and figured I could probably only get 5 of them in Sydney. So the easy way to get to the 6th was to make sure I had an event posted on the map. My goal today is to be able to finish off with an event, Earth Cache, virtual, multi, which there's tons of here, traditional, and a mystery. I couldn't really solve any of the puzzles in the downtown Sydney area. Fortunately, there are lots of Adventure Lab finals that I think I can pull that off with, so I think I'm gonna have a busy day coming up here in Australia as well.
Of the many monuments and memorials to be located around Hyde Park, I decided to host my geocaching event at one of its most prominent, the Archibald Fountain, completed and installed in 1932. Its full name is the J.F. Archibald Memorial Fountain, named after the owner and editor of the Bulletin magazine who allocated the funds to have it built. It was completed by French artist François-Léon Sicard in Paris in 1926. Archibald had specifically chosen a French artist to complete the fountain, not only because of his love for French culture, but also to commemorate the association between Australia and France during World War I. It would see its unveiling in Sydney 6 years later, on the 14th of March, 1932, by the Lord Mayor Samuel Walder, as Archibald's gift to his countrymen.
We are here in Hyde Park, hosting our geocaching event. Not many attendees this morning, and we don't expect all that many, but Pobrot has shown up here all the way in from Norway, visiting Sydney, Australia for the week and having a great time of it?
Yes.
How many geocaches have you found?
Almost 19,000.
19,000. How long have you been geocaching?
Oh, 11 years.
11 years now?
Yes.
All right, and you said you live in Oslo, Norway, right?
Yes.
And from there, how many of the European countries have you gotten out to see?
Almost 22, I think.
Oh, so you can see in just 11 years, she's gotten out there. That's, what, 2 countries a year, give or take, and 1,000 caches a year? You're really hitting it. What is it about geocaching that keeps you coming back to this game?
Oh, I like to came to new places. I like to solve a bit. I am very appreciative to read maps and go for maps and to see everything new.
Has Sydney shown you some pretty amazing places?
Yes.
What would you say your favorite so far is?
I think the Opera House was the most favorite, but all these parks are so lovely.
And it is really lovely, and the Opera House is where we're hoping to end our day. I really appreciate you coming out, and it was very nice to meet you.
Our intimate geocaching event may have begun at the Archibald Memorial Fountain, but my day started well before that. In my excitement to see the city, I got out there and began exploring when the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon.
I love being out in the early morning hours. As you can see, there is not a muggle in sight anywhere around me, nothing to stop me from finding the geocache and searching however I want. Later on, there's gonna be lots of people out, and I'm gonna have to use those stealth skills, but for now, all mine.
Departing my hotel well before the city begins to come awake, I cut a path directly south through the Sydney Central Business District. Before long, I am passing through some oddly familiar gates.
I'm not in the least bit surprised that I found my way into Chinatown. Like I said, in Japan, I think they've claimed a little piece of real estate all over the world. What I am surprised at is, even in this early morning hour, that I've got the place to myself, because this is another spot I know is going to be crowded, probably shoulder to shoulder come a few hours from now, but for right now, Chinatown, all mine, solo.
Originally a timber storage yard, Chinese immigrants into Australia began to move into the Haymarket district in the early 1920s. It began fairly simply, with large wholesale fruit and vegetable markets set up on the streets. The market then encouraged the establishment of small cook shops and lodging houses. Businesses continued to follow to meet the needs of a growing Chinese population.
I always have this unquenchable desire to get out and explore the streets whenever I find myself in a new city. Last night I arrived into Sydney, too late to do so, so went to the hotel, checked in, and set my alarm as if I was gonna sleep that long. I was up easily an hour and a half before the sun rose. I was like, I gotta get out there, I gotta go explore. So here we are, finding geocaches, getting the feel of the city before it really comes to life.
Moving between Haymarket and Surrey Hills, I come across Sydney's Central Station.
When I'm out geocaching, I really stick to the outdoors. I only go inside of buildings when there's either a geocache or an adventure lab forcing me to do so. In this case, there's both. There's a virtual centered on the clock that's inside of there, as well as the adventure labs that move through the station. So we're gonna go check out Central Station.
Opened on August 4th of 1906, Central Station is the largest and busiest railway station to be found anywhere in Australia. Its 12 platforms record the movements of more than 85 million passengers each year, serving over 250,000 people daily. Its defining feature, making it easy to spot from a long way off, is the sandstone clock tower above the building, which officially came into use at 10:22 a.m. on the 12th of March, 1921. It was an important metric for keeping time, even from a long way off. Timing is also the focus of the virtual, which has you reading train schedules to answer the questions. And while most travelers would choose to hop on a train to get to their next destination from here, I walked out from the station knowing that there were geocaches to be found all along the way. Sure, that might mean a bit more walking than necessary, but let's be honest, walking is half the fun of exploring a downtown area like this. And one thing I would miss out entirely while on the train is the sounds of the birds in the early morning hours. One bird in particular had really garnered my attention, and it seemed like my GPS was pointing right at him.
It's the geocache that brought me to this ground zero, but it's that amazing bird call up in the trees that really helping to keep me here. He has one of the best bird songs I think I've ever heard. Just listen to that whistle. Love it.
Circling back toward Hyde Park from Central Station brings me around through Darling Harbor. The path under the freeway leads past an inspirational monument known as a spire. In it, 14 glowing trees stand strong and proud as a metaphor for the community that seems to be holding the freeway up. A nod to the residents who held on to their homes by altering the freeway plans that would have seen them demolished.
Like a lot of the big cities, most of what I'm going to be finding here today is micros. Makes sense when there's a million muggles around. Now I will tell you I found some larger geocaches, and several of those I have not included in the footage because I don't want to give them away. But these kind of micros right here, magnetic key holders, these are going to be the bread and butter of Sydney, just like those cap and cap containers were our bread and butter moving through the big cities in Japan. Thanks, little buddy.
My route back to Hyde Park continues through Darling Harbor, named for Lieutenant General Ralph Darling, the governor of New South Wales from 1825 to 1831. Once I clear the waterfront, it is a relatively straight shot back to the park, with only a couple of geocaches between me and my next objective. I'm welcomed back into the park by a memorial dedicated to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who have served in various conflicts.
I've seen and fired off some pretty large caliber rounds before, but these right here, these are a doozy. I would love to see the cannon that would be able to launch these things out, and the boom that they would make on the other side.
The most prominent and breathtaking memorial to be found within Hyde Park is located on its southern end, the Anzac Memorial. Upon its completion in 1934, it was dedicated to the achievements of the Australian Imperial Force during World War I. Its legacy stretched much deeper though, and over the years it became clear that it represented much more. So at its 50th anniversary in 1984, it was rededicated to the memory of all Australians who have served their country during times of war. Anzac saw its first usage as an acronym for the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps of World War I, but soon after was accepted as a word of its own. The Anzac comprised a part of the expeditionary force that was organized by Great Britain and France to invade the Gallipoli Peninsula. Widespread reports of the courage on display by Anzac forces in Gallipoli became an enduring legend in Australian military history. But that was only the beginning for the Anzac forces in their campaign across the European front. Their infantry divisions would go on to fight against Germany on the Western Front, while the light horses would protect the Suez Canal against the Turks in the Middle East. In their last major offensive of World War I, they took a leading role in breaking through the Hindenburg Line. Of the more than 400,000 who enlisted in the Army and the Navy, representing half the military-aged men in the country, 60,000 would be killed and another 167,000 would be injured.
What a way to end our tour of Hyde Park. Now it is just northward from here to reach the Opera House to bring the first half of our day to an end.
But I can't bring myself to leave Hyde Park without taking a walk under the Anzac Memorial into the Hall of Service. This is the center of the Centenary Extension completed in 2018 that architecturally and artistically mirrors the Hall of Silence. Its artist, Fiona Hall, is quoted as saying, "My resolution of the space is an artwork, but for me, the benchmark of its success, now and over the long term, will reside not in its authorship, but in its capacity to enable viewers to feel a deep connection and resonance with our service given in the face of war." To facilitate this connection, the 8 walls of the Hall of Service display soil from 1701 New South Wales towns, cities, suburbs, and homesteads given as a home address by First World War enlistees. It is intended to represent the broad range of cities, towns, and districts that answered the call to service, the geographical reach of that call, and the willingness and enthusiasm of so many to answer it, and the unfathomable sense of loss and grief for the community's loved ones who answered the call, never to return home again.
It took a few hours, but the city has really come awake now. The streets are starting to get quite crowded, and there's a little bit of everything here. I'm willing to bet I've seen at least a dozen ethnicities representing different cultures just crossing the street behind me, and all the languages I hear indicate that I am right in that assumption. Just about a mile left to go to the Sydney Opera House, and then I can finally take a break for a few minutes.
Just a couple of blocks west of Hyde Park and running directly parallel to it, I find myself in the middle of Sydney's central business district and one of its most popular places, the Pitt Street Mall. At one point a busy street, it was closed off to traffic in the 1990s, becoming a pedestrian-only mall. There is a lot to be seen in this area, including the Sydney Town Hall just around the corner, built in the late 19th century. It serves as the capital of New South Wales, housing the chambers of the Lord Mayor of Sydney, the council offices, and venues for meetings and functions. Easily accessible from Town Hall Station, it's the place to begin with a trip into the shopping district, the entertainment district, or the Queen Victoria building.
There is a virtual and multiple Adventure Lab stages running through the Queen Victoria building. In we go.
Designed by architect George McRae, the Romanesque Revival Queen Victoria building was constructed between 1893 and 1898. It is only about 30 meters wide east to west and stretches for 190 meters north to south. At its opening in 1898, it housed a concert hall, coffee shops, showrooms, and warehouses, but has seen many changes over the years since then. It then became the city library for a number of years until it faced demolition in the 1960s. A massive renovation project began in 1982 until it opened its doors to the public again in 1986. Now it stands with a refurbished beauty to its original design, packed with people and shops. A great place to enjoy a nice lunch or break the bank completely.
The best geocaches are pretty much always going to be those that are hidden in plain sight. Right here on a busy street corner, nobody any the wiser, except you guys.
Out of the north end of the Queen Victoria building, I face a pretty long walk to the Sydney Opera House. All along the way, it is filled with statues, memorials, and other indications of Sydney's rich history, which stretches back for more than 30,000 years to the Aboriginal Australians who have inhabited this area for millenniums. But most of recorded history, and what nearly every monument we come across will harken back to, begins with the arrival of the first fleet of British ships in 1788. It would serve as the foundation of a penal colony created by Great Britain, but as you know, would become so much more. Those ships would sail first to Botany Bay, which had been discovered by Captain James Cook in 1770. Deeming the bay as too exposed for safe anchorage and assessing the surrounding countryside as unsuitable for settlement, Admiral Arthur Phillip would instead sail around to the north into Port Jackson. In his journal, he recorded the landing. "We got into Port Jackson early in the afternoon and had the satisfaction of finding the finest harbor in the world, in which 1,000 sail of the line may ride in the most perfect security." He immediately decided to move the entire fleet into this port, establishing the first settlement on the cove. He named it Sydney Cove in honor of British Home Secretary 1st Baron Sydney, and it would go on to become the heart of the city, although it is more commonly known these days as Circular Quay. The early days in establishing this colony were rough, with the convicts dumped on an unknown shore in a harsh environment. They were faced with poor soil conditions and having to clear the land by hand. Soon enough, though, the convicts found their way, establishing trading links with the rest of the world and developing Sydney into a respectable town. Growth really began to skyrocket in the mid-1880s, with the population increasing from 60,000 to over 400,000 in just 40 years between 1850 and 1890. Now it features a population of well over 5 million people and ranks in as the 8th richest city in the world. And it is a major tourist destination, attracting over 14 million visitors each year, with 11 million domestically and over 3.5 million coming from internationally.
And thanks to some very creative hiders, there are even geocaches to be found right here in front of the very busy Sydney Opera House. This is outstanding, and somehow I managed to do it without any of those people doing what I was up to.
Our northward trek through the city comes to an end at the Sydney Opera House, widely regarded as one of the world's most famous and distinctive buildings. Designed by Danish architect Jorn Utzon and completed by an Australian architectural team led by Peter Hall, the Sydney Opera House was opened by Queen Elizabeth II on the 20th of October, 1973. Its multiple venues play host to over 1,500 performances and attract more than 1 million visitors each year.
Mission successful. I've managed to complete a busy day here in the downtown Sydney area. I began the morning in Hyde Park with an event that was attended by one other geocacher from Norway, and K-Brat and I had a good time together at the fountain before I began my geocaching in earnest. We made our way through the downtown area and throughout the course of the day, all the way to the main objective, the Sydney Opera House. Now, I've been walking and on my feet for the last 8 hours solid, and I am exhausted. So I'm gonna head on in there, grab a bite to eat, and then recalibrate before the next adventure coming up while we continue to explore the downtown Sydney area. Thank you guys for joining me on this adventure, and I can't wait to show you more of Sydney in the upcoming videos. Make sure to like this video, subscribe, stay tuned for updates, and I'll see you out on the trail.